There's a lot of really good tools for like whiteboarding, for stand-up meetings. We use Geekbot so that we can do our stand-ups in each person's time zone at 9 a.m. Geekbot ties right into Slack. Basically asks, what did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? Helps us kind of keep a pulse on things. We also do in-person stand-ups a couple times a week as well. And all of that is kind of the functional software. There are some really interesting team bonding software that we use. I found Icebreaker. It's like icebreaker.range.co, I think. So that has like little questions that we'll throw into Slack in the morning, kind of a get to know your teammate. We've used we play virtual games once a month with the team, which is kind of a nice way to bond since we don't get that coffee. You know, you can't walk and have a coffee with someone. We don't get to eat lunch together. So we'll play like code names or some virtual games together, which have been really fun. And then we use 15.5 to keep track of our one-on-ones, which this also helps to kind of keep a pulse on people's happiness inside the organization, how they're doing. And it gives leadership visibility into basically the whole org. And so our ops team will do a weekly review based on the 15.5 submissions, and we use Bonusly as like an internal kind of motivation system. And that's anyone can give what's known as Bonusly points, and Bonusly points can be redeemed for various prizes. So if someone does something, it's our way of showing appreciation. And then we also do a team call every week. And so I know all hands sometimes are a monthly thing. For a lot of companies, we do it weekly just to get everyone in the same room and connected. And we leave time at the end of that call just for kind of general banter discussion. That helps keep us connected, and it also helps to keep people from feeling too lonely, right? If they go too long without having a connection to the team, we found that that's really demotivating.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's what some companies are obviously struggling with, that essentially what you're just talking about, what essentially those tools solve, right? Kind of more along the lines that, you need to try essentially put together a suite of products, if you could say, because obviously one doesn't cover everything. That kind of almost brings your work environment into home environment remotely, because otherwise you miss out on a lot of those things that are quite important that, keep you engaged, that are nothing to do with work, right? So
absolutely, yeah. We found when people aren't engaged, then their work suffers as well. We also the biggest danger that we've seen in product is people siloing, and so they tend to work too long on something, and sometimes when if it's in the wrong direction, we lose a lot of time. Those are things that are much easier to catch in an office, but are kind of unique to this remote world.
Absolutely, yeah, and managing things when you have so many people remote can get quite difficult if you're trying to do it just via a task management system or something like that. So definitely that makes a lot of sense. I mean, is there anything that you would kind of leave a note on there for remote working before we move on to the next step, or anyone have any questions, throw them into the box right now about that? See if we have anything that comes in here. So I did have some questions about earlier. Yeah, I think there's some here kind of about specifically product remote management teams, product teams specifically, if there's anything different for product teams versus a company.
Yeah, so the hardest part we've had with the product team is the collaboration aspect. I have not found a replacement for being all in the same office and a whiteboard. So we do still get together at least twice a year as a product team, generally with the product leadership team, and we will do a couple-day offsite where we plan our next 6 months. I know that's not an option now, but that's to say that type of ideation is really hard. And so what we try to keep is what we've done now at Dribbble is broken up into small teams. And so we'll have teams of 3 to 5 people working on a very specific issue. And we found that with that 5-person collaboration over Zoom is about the limit to being able to make decisions effectively. There are some tools like Freehand from Envision for whiteboarding. There's also like Shape and from IDEO that are really nice, but it's still very difficult to sit in a Zoom call and do the type of product planning that you would do in an office. And so it kind of takes two things. One is getting really comfortable with silences on video, which is incredibly uncomfortable for the most part. And that's just spending time with the team on video, allowing for silences, allowing people to think and not have to fill every white space there. And then the other is trying to find those times when you can get together to do your deeper planning. And like I said, we try to plan about 6 months ahead in person.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, that is a kind of a tip for some people, even coming out of this, the fact that, if the new paradigm of remote working is probably going to stick for a lot of companies. So keep that in mind, that obviously, 6 months kind of at minimum is what you're saying, to make sure you still do get those in-person meetings.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. All right. I mean, product here, obviously, I think was probably one of the more, obviously, pressing concerns for a lot of people, kind of looking at, obviously, pivoting or reprioritizing, the roadmap or the features itself, and kind of looking at the current needs and how that kind of even ties into future needs, because you can't build something that's just going to be relevant for 1 month when it will take you. That doesn't make any sense. And then obviously actionable strategies. There is a little bit of recession. Obviously, some areas like travel, especially, are a little bit very low on input data, I guess you could say, to make those decisions on data. So, what are your kind of thoughts on that area? I mean, has this affected you in a negative way or a positive way? Because obviously, different industries are affected differently. And what are your thoughts?
So, I mean, the good thing for us is Dribbble has been fairly resilient because we are already diversified in our product lines. So we have designer subscriptions on a SaaS model. We have hiring, which happens on a recurring basis, but is generally like a 2.5 to 3 month lifetime for the customer. And then we do have an advertising business. So we have already diversified our portfolio, where had we only relied on one, I think we'd be hurting a little bit more, especially hiring right now. In terms of pivoting, I'd be curious, are we looking for kind of internal strategy or kind of external market strategy?
Yeah, I think the market strategy is more the last point that's coming up after this in this slide, the kind of exit strategies and reaching customers with like real value. So for this specific one, I think it's more internal. I mean, it still obviously does apply to a market strategy outwards, but it's kind of, what is the best decision? Is there a reason to pivot and develop some new features right now, let's say? Or is it more reprioritizing for an extended timeline to do that? And is it current needs or is it current/future needs?
So, really good question. So I'll say, just on the kind of people ops side, I think building resilience for pivoting is essential internally. We work on basically an eight-week cadence, and we reprioritize every 8 weeks what we're going to build in the next 8 weeks. And so we do a 2-week planning cycle and a 6-week build cycle. We have kind of the high level roadmap of where we want to go for the year, but we don't set anything in stone as to what exactly we're going to build next until about 8 weeks out. And we use that time when the team is building for the leadership to basically shape the next body of work. And it's very similar to the Basecamp model of Shape Up, which Ryan's phenomenal book by Ryan Singer, and so that does keep us agile already on the roadmap internally, and it has built up some resilience for the team to do the R&D and the research, and be able to throw out work, which is always the hardest thing for individual contributors to do, is to work on something for a long time and then have to throw it out because it's not right, and so that internal resilience needs to be built up. At Dribbble, what we're doing as an external strategy is we are doubling down on like the hiring business line right now, which it's taking a hit. People aren't hiring, and that's no surprise. But we are building up so that we're ready, because we know the market will rebound.
Yeah.
Whether it's 3 months or 6 months, it will rebound. It'll probably look more like a remote workforce, which is actually a huge advantage for us as a global network. So we are spending the next couple months reinvesting into that business line because we feel like in 3 to 6 months, we don't want to be behind the curve when things rebound. We want to be ahead of it, and so that's how we've decided to kind of invest our time. While it's a little bit slower, um, I think that's different for each industry, but I would start to look ahead 3 to 6 months. What are you going to need when things come back? And get ahead of that because picking up talent in 3 to 6 months is going to be harder than it is today. There's a lot of fantastic talent in the market as companies are doing layoffs. So being able to take advantage of that today, if you can, and being able to reinvest in yourself for the future, I think is an incredibly valuable strategy if you can survive through this and kind of bridge this gap.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, I think that kind of covers it really. I mean, it's kind of about understanding where the market is, but not just reacting like a lot of companies are at the moment, and using some type of basic COVID messaging, and actually, just, oh, these are uncertain times, buy our product. Understanding what the actual needs are now, and tying those into what the future needs are going to be, whether that be within an industry that's hard hit like hospitality, where the timeline is going to be a little bit slower, or something like well, I guess you could say even a webinar product or something like that, or Netflix, where your everything's shot through the roof because of it. So
Yep.
but obviously, at the same time, people are going to go back to work. So looking at what's happening now, but kind of comparing how that's going to affect the future is a key point, I think, for a lot of people, and probably the biggest insight from there. But that ties straight into these exit strategies, which you kind of already brought on, which is kind of really looking at seizing the opportunity. And we had some interesting points from a lot of people in the group that were kind of what I just mentioned. A lot of companies, even big companies like Toyota or other companies like that, where it's literally just, these are uncertain times. Great, everyone's hurting. Buy a Toyota.
Yep.
Which
We've all
is
seen the commercial.
yeah, it's very exactly right. And I think a lot of people, I mean, almost everyone, actually had mentioned something like that, where the authenticity of what the outreach or the marketing, the product marketing side, I guess you could say, is really, how do you manage that line, in terms of, look, we obviously want to help people, and that is our goal, but we don't want to do what they've done.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't think they're helping people, and I
That's
think
one,
that's part of people's problem with the angle. I also don't think companies were prepared for this at all. I think there's two things that have been effective. One is Airbnb shifted over to in-person experiences, right? They're not part of their business model at all, but they saw the need for it in the market and they solved it, right? So when they promote, sorry, not in-person experiences, but virtual experiences. So when they hold on one sec. When they're promoting that product, it feels very in tune with the times today, and so they don't need to say, times are tough. Buy a Toyota. They have a product ready for the times today, and I think the other is like you mentioned, authenticity is just being genuine with the way we're giving back. And you can use that in your marketing, whether you're giving donations back to a key organization, or profit sharing with a key organization, or you're arranging some kind of donation drive on behalf of your company. I think those are the things that they're a bit more brand marketing, but they are ways to still get your name out without feeling kind of that icky sense, the need to acknowledge what's happening, was still driven with that kind of capitalist message of buying something you don't need. And so I do think you will see more companies showcasing their charitable work in advertising. And I think any company, large or small, has that opportunity today, if they're not able to pivot their business to be something that solves an essential need today. Um, but I don't think continuing with the advertising that we're seeing is it feels a bit tone deaf. I would agree.
Yeah, I would think that's probably an area that people are a little concerned about because it's been going on for a while, and then companies are, I think, a lot of people that I've spoken to, they obviously want to have they want to help people, as an example, credit checking company or something like that, right? Obviously that's very beneficial for businesses, trying to get loans or whatever it might be.
Yep.
But, they don't want their messaging just to be, COVID-19, use us. So I think that's what you're talking about, really.
Yeah, can you align it with a great story, right? Can you find that case study of helping a nonprofit bridge or a small business, beloved business bridge, right? And really leverage that in your messaging. At Dribbble, we gave all designers access to our project board. That's one of the key features that we actually sell, and is access to this exclusive project board. And so we decided to give all designers on the platform access for free for 3 months. And so really it didn't make us any money, but we felt like it was the right thing to do. And it was the right thing to kind of to do for the community. So that was a decision that we made. It is a bit of marketing, right? Trying to earn that goodwill within the community. But at the same time, it addressed a very specific need of people getting laid off, needing to find work, and us having at least a potential solution for that.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I think that's what it comes back to. It is, at that point, people will obviously know that it is almost marketing in a sense, but at the same time, no matter what, it is extremely valuable and it is authentic. So, there's no, when you do that, instead of basically, turning out to look like Toyota, people see the value in it, and there's no real resistance to what you're doing. If anything, there's a positive response, especially if it's really actually helping people, right? It helps them first, maybe helps you in the future. I think that's where things are going in terms of this reaching customers and actually adding real value. Yeah, seizing that opportunity, which is what you've talked about, looking at the market and what's going to be happening in the coming months, and attaching not only your stories and your positioning and messaging to that, but the features that you can build out if you need to reprioritize a little bit features for that, so you can basically capture that goodwill by giving goodwill out yourself.
Yep, and being ready. I think the key is things are going to rebound, and so how do you set yourself up for success today? Looking forward, since we're not anticipating growth for the next 3 to 6 months, but we know that that we need to be ready, because if we're behind when things rebound, we're going to miss a huge opportunity.
Yeah, and I think that's the end point that we get to, right? That all of this is maybe a negative situation for some, maybe positive for others. No matter what, there will be a large opportunity, in the coming months, as long as you prepare now for it. Whether that be, with pivoting your product, bringing on the right people for it, or whatever that might be. So, I think that kind of goes through the main questions that we have. I know we're actually already over time here, but as long as no one has too many issues, that should be fine. So just go through a quick recap of what we talked about. Obviously, initially with that remote working, the main thing kind of being that, try to make it as real as a kind of like an office environment as possible, because you really got to maintain that engagement, that motivation, and the tools that you use to do that should be kind of looked at in terms of addressing that need. We do have a white paper that we're putting together from this. So I think some of the people that we had one-to-one for this as well, that we're going to be getting that across to everyone after. So I will include some of the tools that Michael mentioned on here for that, and as well as some of the other ones that other people think are quite good. So hopefully that'll be useful to go over that point. And obviously product pivoting, and exit strategies. It's really all about what's going on now is not necessarily, you don't necessarily need to meet the needs of tomorrow. You need to meet the needs of, 2-3 weeks, and what the new kind of paradigm is going to be going forward after things start recovering. Because if you just look at what's happening now, you're going to pivot to something that is not existing in 2 or 3 months. You're going to kind of miss that opportunity. But at the same time, if you don't do anything and you're not prepared, or you don't do something to engage with your customers in an authentic way, you're going to miss out on the opportunity. So I think that kind of covers it. I mean, Michael, what do you think? Is there any other main points that are important that I've missed over on that?
No, I think that's it. I think the key about remote is that the engagement is now intentional versus letting an office environment kind of do a lot of that team building work for us. Remote, it's a very intentional game. And so it does take a lot of upfront work to get people connected in remote. And those are things that we don't think about in an office because people can naturally connect. Yeah, and I think each business is different in terms of what should they do. Should they be thinking short term and survival, or are they able to think long term and set themselves up for success? That just depends on the runway, and I think that's a personal choice for each business.
Fair enough, that makes sense. Yeah, and I mean, I think everyone can agree really on that front of the authenticity on that side. So no matter what you do, make sure you're not just doing something and hoping that'll pay you for some reason. Otherwise, you will, really negatively influence what you're doing. So I mean, I guess that pretty much goes through the main issues that we kind of talked about. Obviously, we got a little bit of issues there, so that's why we've gone over time. But if anyone has any questions, throw them in there right now into the question and answer box. I'll just give a few minutes there for people to ask questions. I do have some that had come through before, so while we're waiting for some people to ask, I'll go through some here. I don't think we covered this, but Alistair at Triptease, he did have, because he's in the hospitality industry, he'd asked something around about that low volume, how to make decisions with a low volume when you don't really have that much necessarily data to kind of make your decisions, for let's say if you're going to pivot or reprioritize. Do you have any insights on that potentially, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, what we've done in the past is do as many user interviews as we can, which means just getting people on the phone. I remember going to market with a brand asset management product, and we talked to over 150 people, which in a survey that would be really a blip, right? At Dribbble, we do surveys and we get 20,000 respondents, and so we were able to collect a fairly concrete amount of data. But when we didn't, we found that those those user interviews were key to identifying a lot of the identical pain points. And honestly, 150 was totally excessive. We probably only needed about 10. And you start to see those trends emerge in the problems that people are having that they want you to solve, and you can start to take immediate action. You may get some of it wrong because you're going to be 50% gut, 50% research, but at least you have that 50% research in place.
Okay, that's a great answer. Let's see what else we have here. There we go. Product management priorities during a downturn. That's another one, but I think I kind of already answered that. Prioritizing business requests while working remotely. I don't know if that's exactly working remotely, or if it was just about prioritizing business requests specifically. So potentially, I don't know exactly what the question is. Glenn did ask that, I think, on our call, so that might be something interesting to look into. Is there a way that you guys manage that specifically? Does it change with remote working, or is it the same? Because obviously the interaction across the business lines is completely different now.
I don't know if it would change. So what we do, again, we do an 8-week prioritization. And so we do that within our leadership team. And so So as we harden the roadmap, we're having meetings with our CEO, with our CFO, with myself, and we're basically deciding what is the next big priority that we need to invest in, and how much are we willing to invest in it. And so um, those decisions still happen at the leadership level, and we try to give the product team basically the shape of the work that we're looking for and what our outcomes are. And so I don't know if it changes with remote. It probably just happens with a slightly smaller team because decisions are a little bit easier with a smaller team when you're remote. But other than that, it's still the leadership team is involved, and we reshape every 8 weeks.
Awesome. Okay. Well, hopefully that answers that question that you did have there, Glenn. So, I mean, I think that pretty much covers everything. Like I said before, we did do a few one-to-ones with people before this. So, you know, if you want that white paper, you can just throw a white paper in the chat box. I'll make sure that gets sent out to you. I don't want to send out emails to people who don't want them. So throw the white paper into the chat box if you do want that, you know, kind of with the tools, you know, and the basic overview of the points we've gone over here. I can also send the slides over to anyone in the recording who wants it. Maybe webinar in the chat box. So that works as well. Other than that, I will be reaching out to a few people who had some other questions afterwards. So if you want some answers on anything else, happy to do that. Next week, we should have potentially a lady named Sweepa from Machine Mix in London, and that's an early stage startup. She's potentially going to speak for us next week. That or Louise from HubSpot is going to be on potentially next week, and we have Roger from Open that will be the week after potentially coming on as well. So if anyone does want to join those, I'll get that webinar link sent out to you. And I guess I'll leave it to you, Michael, for maybe, you know, any last closing thoughts on the environment and any tips for you know, other senior product guys out there and what they can potentially do to make it out of this successfully.
Yeah, I mean, I feel for anyone who just went remote. It's I think a positive transition for your team, but at the same time, it can be really challenging as a leader to know what's going on. I would encourage them to rethink the way that they approach remote. You can't approach it in the same way as in-house, in person, and steer away from kind of technological authoritative methods, which we have seen some companies take, where they're keeping people on video and that kind of thing. I think you have to build trust with your team if you want to get the best work. I'm not saying that anyone's doing that, but that is certainly an instinct when you're trying to make sure that everything is under control. So I would rethink your processes and try to build up that trust with the team so that you can ensure that everyone is effective remotely, without having to kind of dictate their day. So, but for individual contributors, this can be an incredible experience. You may even see an increase in performance and output from your team as they are able to get a lot more heads down time with less distractions. So take advantage of that. My door's open, so feel free to hit me up on Twitter or shoot me an email if you do have any specific questions around leading product teams in this time.
Yeah, and I know Michael has a pretty awesome podcast over there. I think Rocket Ship FM, is that right?
Yeah.
So if anyone wants to go there, he's got some awesome stuff over there. Got to give you a little bit of a plug for being on here. So there you go. Well, I really appreciate the time, Michael. I think everyone probably appreciates your insights. I'll get everything across to the people that want it. Nick, Tim, and you want your white paper there. I think potentially some others as well there. Yep. All right. So I'll get that across. And I really appreciate the time, Michael, and I hope everyone has a great day and look forward to hopefully having you on again next week. Not you, Michael, specifically, but anyone who wants to join for whoever's speaking next for, you know, if anything's changed in the next week or any future updates on what we're speaking about. Thanks again for joining, everyone, and stay safe out there.